welcome to the paranormal and metaphysical world of Twilight tonight. Host DD Moonflyer grew up with very open-minded parents who had many experiences with UFOs and the paranormal. Because of her mom's insistence on exposing her to spiritual classes, meditation, and teachings of Edgar Cayce, DD had a fascination and deep interest in the paranormal. Her own paranormal experiences have led her to seek out and interview other fascinating, knowledgeable people for better understanding of this phenomenon. Now, your host of Twilight Tonight, DD Moonflyer.
Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for watching Twilight Tonight on WLTK-DB. Tonight's guest is, oh my gosh, I'm lost for words reading his resume. He's amazing, and he's really done a lot for all of this. Wow. Randy Liebeck, ladies and gentlemen. He's a researcher, writer, commentator, covering the field of ghost and poltergeist phenomena. He is a representative of the Ghost Research Society, New Jersey. He is a highly decorated police officer and federal national security operator manager. He was. And everybody, please welcome Randy. Hi, Randy.
Hey, Dee.
Boy, that was very nerve-wracking. You've done some amazing stuff, Randy.
I've been around for a long time, playing at this, and just through the osmosis over the decades, I've absorbed a lot, and I try to put a lot back out there as an educator and a commentator to keep interest in the field and what knowledge we have in this field moving forward to new generations.
Right. When people hear about parapsychology, they instantly think ghost. I know you do so much research. Can you explain that to me, what parapsychology means to you?
Well, parapsychology does deal with ghosts. That is one small cog of the field of parapsychology. Parapsychology is a multidisciplinary field which combines elements of psychology, physics, neurology, biology, to some degree anthropology, and other social sciences and hard sciences. The tasking of parapsychology is to explore unexplained or not understood areas of human cognition and perception. That includes the ability to know things or receive information from sources we should not be able to receive them from, which is ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, knowing things that happen before they happen, all things which appear to be going on inside of our minds, but not using normal senses. So that is one area of what parapsychology looks into. The other side of that, again, dealing with capabilities of the human mind and human consciousness, is psychokinesis, the ability for us to influence things outside of us, mind-matter interaction. We want something to move or something to happen in the environment, either consciously with intent or subconsciously, where we don't know we are doing it, but there seems to be substantial evidence over the centuries that some people in some circumstances can cause changes outside of their body in the environment to make objects move, make a vase slide across a table, things like that. We're dealing with the interaction of mind, which is consciousness, that which makes us us, what we perceive, how we perceive the universe around us. And we understand a lot of that. We understand how vision works. We understand how hearing works and how these organs interface with the brain and trigger imagery, sight, sounds, smells. We do not know how this extrasensory perception or extrasensory manipulation of the environment works. We do know it involves human consciousness. The other arena that parapsychology looks into is survival of that human consciousness after bodily death. Can what makes you, what makes me, does that end, when our body and brains die, or is there something which lingers in the environment? And again, there is a large degree of circumstantial evidence going over hundreds of years that yes, something of us remains after bodily death. So parapsychology looks into that because it falls into the mind consciousness arena. So yep, we definitely do ghosts. Most parapsychologists do not do ghosts. I'm not a parapsychologist. I want to put that out there right now. I am a citizen scientist. I work with parapsychologists. I consult with parapsychologists. I do not have the PhD or the MA psychology next to my name, where I can call myself a parapsychologist. I am a parapsychological field investigator. I do field investigations under the direction of parapsychologists.
Gotcha. Out of curiosity, I know I've heard you talk a lot about ghosts and poltergeists. A lot of people have always asked me, what is the difference between the ghost and poltergeist?
That's a very good question, and we don't know the answer for sure. Within the field of parapsychology, which is also referred to as psychical research, that's the historical name for this field going back to the 1800s, we've noticed a difference in poltergeist phenomena and ghost or apparitional phenomena. Mm-hmm. Ghost and apparitional phenomena seems to indicate that there is some non-corporeal surviving consciousness of a dead person that is lingering behind, and somehow it is interacting with us. We're perceiving it. That's separate from what we call a place memory or an environmental or residual haunting, where you have a haunted, British castle where for the past 400 years at midnight on a full moon, people see the lady in white walking across the parapets of the castle, fading away, doing the same thing over and over and over again. No change, no interaction with the witness. That does not seem to be a surviving person, a surviving consciousness. That on the surface looks like some sort of audio or video recording somehow in the environment. But when we talk about ghosts or apparitions, we're talking about what we're presuming to be surviving human consciousness. And there are certain patterns of behavior and activity that we see in those cases, which makes us think, okay, that seems to be a person who's not us. Somebody else from elsewhere is out there doing something. With poltergeist cases, there are some similar phenomena. People do occasionally see apparitions in poltergeist cases, but usually in ghost or apparition cases, there is no movement of objects. If there is, it's very, very limited in scope. You will see things in a apparitional haunting or even a residual haunting. You will hear things. You may feel sensations of presence or something. Poltergeist cases, you can have those things to some degree or other, but poltergeist cases are famous for kinetic manipulation of the environment. Objects move around. Flower vases levitate and float across the room. Ashtrays are flung across the room. Dishes explode. People are pushed, shoved. TV channels change by themselves. Those are things that when we study the compiled literature of ghost and apparitional cases, we've found that really ghosts don't do those kind of things. Usually, and I always give that caveat. There are some crossover things, but usually ghosts do not levitate things, move things across the room. Ghosts do not make eggs fly out of a refrigerator through the refrigerator door and fling across the room, as happened in the Tina Resch poltergeist case. Ghosts, if you or I died tonight, God forbid, and we were here tomorrow as ghosts, Would we know how to do that? How on earth would I be able to, make matter go through matter? How do I make things appear? How to, if I can't do it when I'm alive, I'm not sure I can do it when I'm dead, unless I go study at the Ghost Academy and get an advanced degree in haunting. Poltergeist activity, these gross manipulations of matter and the outer environment, we think in most cases that is a living person. That it's psychokinesis, which I discussed earlier, one of the tenet areas of parapsychology, the ability of the mind or consciousness to impact things in the outer environment outside of the mind. The best analogy I can give for that is we use mind over matter, or technically psychokinesis, every day of our lives. If I raise my right hand, I raised my right hand because mentally I wanted to raise my right hand. I made that decision. My mind there sends a signal through the body's nervous system to activate the right nerves and neurons to make my hand move. It seems that in psychokinesis and poltergeist cases, the mind is doing the same thing, but it's using some other avenue, some other vector. It's not manipulating neurons inside the body, but somehow that same intent, that same process. Hey, I want that object to move. Maybe the ashtray on the desk instead of my hand. That intent physically leaves the envelope of the body and does that. There are some cases in poltergeists where, yes, people see apparitions. People do have that sense of a presence and feeling, but there are some differences, which we can get into later, which gives us some clues about why we make that dividing line between a ghost, a dead person, and a poltergeist, which in most cases, most people involved in parapsychology say that's not a ghost, that's a person, living person.
Right. Often you see poltergeist activity with teenagers. Do you find that to be very true?
It is. Most poltergeist cases that have been documented and investigated by credible researchers, parapsychologists, and people who are trained to parapsychological standards. In most of the cases in the literature, and I'm talking parapsychological literature, not the pop culture TV shows where they encounter demon of the week at different houses. But in most cases, the majority of poltergeist agents, and by agent, that's the person that we feel is responsible subconsciously for the poltergeist phenomena, most agents are in the adolescent age range, ranging from, and people reach adolescence at different points of their life. It's not always 13 or 14. There are poltergeist agents commonly from 10, 11 up until 18. There are outliers. There are poltergeist agents who are adults, the poltergeist agents who are senior citizens. Those cases do exist, and they are well attested cases. There may be some cases where we think younger people than 10 or 11 are the agent or the focus for this. But most cases, yes, we do see that nexus to adolescence.
Agents meaning the person causing the phenomenon.
The person causing it, the agent behind the activity. In poltergeist cases, there are two terms which are sometimes used interchangeably, but they should not be. One is agent. That is the person who we think is causing the phenomena, and generally subconsciously. They don't know they're doing it. The term we use for that is RSPK, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. It is recurrent because things happen more than once. They are spontaneous because the person's not sitting there saying, "Oh, I'm going to move this, ashtray." It just happens. Very often, it happens in an outburst, an expenditure of energy. Like if you or I got mad and we got into a fight, we might throw objects at each other or smash some dishes. Very often in poltergeist cases, the physical activity seems similar to that. It's like somebody's having a temper tantrum and things are being flung with violence. Sometimes much more subtle than that. Sometimes you'll have movement of objects in poltergeist cases where objects slowly float around and with directional, intelligent intent seem to go certain places or move in certain ways. It's not just a random outburst of anger or energy. So the agent is the person or persons, and there are a large number of cases where we can't identify one single person, but we've noticed that when a group of people get together, let's say a family, and if you have the daughter and the father and the grandmother, they get together for dinner. When those three people are together in the room, activity will happen. And maybe there's stress around the dinner table. The daughter and the grandfather are always fighting, and then stuff will start smashing in the kitchen around them. If any of those three people are there by themselves, nothing happens. If two of them are there present by themselves, nothing will happen. But those three people, if they get together, you'll see activity. So there's you're making a soup, and you have to have certain ingredients in certain amounts, and in some cases we've noticed that it is a family dynamic, a group dynamic, that is the agent rather than one person. But historically, most of the literature indicates one person, an agent. The other term we use is the focus. In poltergeist cases, the focus person is the person the activity happens around. That person has to be present, or that person or persons have to be present for the activity to happen. And it generally does not occur if that person is not around, and it happens within a certain proximity to that person. Some people use focus and agent meaning the same thing. A lot of us disagree with that, because we know for a fact that there's a focus, and we can identify if every time you come to visit me, the poltergeist stuff happens around you. And it doesn't happen at the restaurant or in my house when you don't come to visit. But every time you show up, it happens. Then we know you're the focus, or us being together is the focus. So that we can establish without any real question. Can we assume with any certainty that you are actually the agent, that you are the one that is creating this phenomena subconsciously through underlying stresses or repressed anger or whatever the current vogue hypothesis is? The activity might be suggestive of that, but we can't prove that in most cases. We can safely say, yep, you're the focus, stuff happens around you, but are you the cause? You're probably, I would say, in my opinion, definitely part of that recipe. That, yep, you being there is needed, but is it your consciousness, your mind, your internal wiring and physiology and neurology that is generating some sort of signal or field causing this? That's harder to prove. So agent is more of a hypothetical term. Focus is more of an absolute term. There are people, this stuff happens around.
I find it really interesting nowadays. A lot of people talk about shadow people. They see shadow people all the time. Through your experiences and research, have you seen a lot of those? Or is this a recent glamorized thing that's happening a lot now?
I'm going to follow this up with a caveat again. But yes, this is a recent pop culture mediated phenomena. And I say that by having reviewed the literature of the field going back hundreds of years. And some cases going back much, much further. There have been reports of apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists going back to Babylonian and Sumerian days. And the phenomena dynamics are the same. Whether activities are experienced today in New York City or whether it was an ancient Sumeria, thousands of years ago, the core phenomena that people have experienced remains the same, which is indicative of it being a real, rather than manufactured experience that people are having. In the literature of paranormal encounters, whether you want to call it ghost, haunting, or poltergeist, there have been reports of dark, shadowy figures. There always have been. They are not common, they are outlier cases, but people have reported seeing dark shadows moving in rooms. Uh,
Mhm.
Historically, most reported ghost encounters, uh, the apparitions do not look like dark, misty shadows. They are not transparent, glowing people wearing sheets. Most apparitional experiences, people report seeing somebody that looks just like you or me, and nothing to indicate that they are a ghost, unless up until the point they disappear while they're being looked at, or the person blinks or looks away for a second. The witness looks away for a second, turns back around, and then that person is gone, and there's no place they could have possibly been. More rarely, they're seen to fade away in a classic Hollywood, fading ghost thing. But most cases, it's blink, they're gone. If it weren't for that, the witness would not thought anything was unusual. Other times, they'll see somebody and they'll recognize that person as, hey, Joe. Yeah, and they'll pass them, down the street. Yeah, that's great. I just bumped into Joe, but hey, wait a minute. Joe died last week. And you turn back around, and there's no one there. During the initial encounter, the apparition that is perceived by the witness looks like a living, breathing, three-dimensional, full-colored person. The idea of Casper the Friendly Ghost, the white sheets and the that was a Hollywood creation, or before even Hollywood. In the UK, they used to put on these stage shows where they would project using mirrors and reflectors and lamps a ghostly image onto the screen on the stage to scare people. And when that effect was created, folks realized, well, hey, most ghosts look like regular people. Back in the 1800s, the Society for Psychical Research in the UK had done a large deal of case studies and surveys, which showed us just that ghosts look like people. Producers of these stage shows and later Hollywood, they realized, well, if we're going to present a ghost story and show a ghost, if the ghost looks just like Randy or Dee Dee, that's not going to scare anybody. We need something to make it look unusual, paranormal, spooky, look not like a living person. So the idea of the Casper the Friendly Ghost came in for because they had utility for stage productions and movies. Going back into earlier history, there were some drawings and woodcuts of ghosts in ancient literature, which did look like the ghost was wearing flowing white robes. But that was because back then people were buried in burial shrouds, which were flowing white robes, very often that covered the head, thereby giving you that ghost wearing the sheet effect. That's how, if anybody was buried, that's the clothing they were buried in. So if that person is being seen as a ghost, and ghosts are seen wearing clothes, I'm not aware of any credible reports in the literature of people seeing naked ghosts on the street. Ghosts are wearing clothes, and there are various issues with that, and there are various possible explanations for that. But if today ghosts are seen wearing clothes, and they'd be wearing modern clothes from whatever era that person lived in, whether it's the 2000s or the 1940s or the 1800s. If a ghost was seen back in a couple thousand years ago, that ghost, it's not surprising they were reported being wearing a burial shroud. So that's where the initial concept of the Charlie Brown dressed in his ghost Halloween costume
I love that
comes
one.
from, and that played into the Hollywood persona too.
Yeah, my husband has a question. He wants to know this. Do we see ghosts with our minds or our eyes?
We see ghosts with our minds in 99% of the cases. Ghosts, as far as we can tell, are not light reflecting objects that take up physical space and reflect light. For us to see them with our eyes, an object has to reflect light. And how do we know they don't reflect light? Because in many cases, you'll have 4 people at a location. 2 of them, or maybe even 3 of them, will say, "Hey, you see that old lady standing in the corner there? I think that's the ghost of whoever." And 2 people, 3 people will see that apparition clearly, and they'll give the same description, exact description. But the 3rd or 4th person in the room, staring at the same spot, see nothing. If there was something there reflecting light to the eyeball and that image is being processed by the visual processing center of the brain, everybody would see it. But along the same lines, if somebody sees an apparition like that, then pulls out their trusty camera and takes a photograph, if it's a physical object reflecting light that looks like that old lady, that image should be recorded on the camera, whether it's video, still camera, film, digital, doesn't matter. It's reflecting light to the eyes. It would reflect light to the camera lens. We don't get that. It's a general rule. People see a ghost, try to take a picture. Nothing is there at all. In a few cases with photo and video, when people pull out their camera in the heat of the moment, and that actually very rarely happens. Even though today everyone has their cell phones on them with a camera on them, and people say, "Well, if all these millions of cameras out in the streets every day, how come we're not getting hundreds and thousands of photographs every day of ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever?" Well, the fact is that when a person is caught unawares, if you're walking down the street and you see an apparition, well, like I said, most cases you don't think, "Hey, there's a ghost." You think, "Oh, there's somebody walking down the street. Oh, they just disappeared in front of me." At that point, it's too late to pull out the camera. Or even if you see something really weird going on, and you say, "Oh my God, that's a ghost in the corner," while you're processing that, that's, "Oh my goodness, this is that a ghost? Is that real? Can I believe what I'm seeing?" While you're going through that psychological process of being caught unawares and trying to process, what is going on? Am I really seeing it? During that time, the object will disappear or fade away, and you don't have time to grab your camera. So just because we all have our cameras on us, cars crash every day. Planes fall out of the sky. Not every day, thank God, but it happens. Trains crash. Lightning strikes. How often are people right there when that happens with their camera in their hand? And how many pictures do we see of that? Yes, there are. It does happen, but it's relatively rare. Same with ghosts. But when people do snap that picture, "Oh, there's the ghost. Let me get the picture right now." There's no ghost there, or there is some anomaly. There's some visual something on the image, which might be anomalous. It might be something we can't explain. It could be a glowing ball of light. It could be maybe a luminous form or a mist or a shadow. But not what the people are seeing with their eyes. They're seeing a person.
Right.
So that tells us right there that whatever these objects are, whatever a ghost is, we are sensing it not with our eyes, we're sensing it with our minds. Now, that's extrasensory perception. We see ghosts through ESP. The eyes are not involved. However, when we see the ghost, it may appear to us just like we're seeing something with our eyes, because the visual processing area of the brain is being stimulated in this case. So it's bypassing the eyes because there's no light being reflected. But that psychic signal that you're picking up on is processed by the visual and or audio and or olfactory, because people smell things in hauntings.
Right.
It's triggering these areas of the brain, and we process it as, "Hey, we're seeing this, or we're hearing this, or we're smelling this, or we're feeling this sensation," even though physically there's nothing there causing that effect. In most cases, there are some hypotheses that have been developed going back a couple hundred years that there may be something physically in the environment. Something is occupying physical space. Is quasi-physical, meaning something's there, but you can't really see it. But whatever it is, it does not look like dear dead Aunt Edna who's come back from the grave. It's maybe a invisible energy field, or maybe something, a luminous phenomena, but it is not. It's not got two legs, two arms, a head, eyes, and that hypothesis, which is called the phantasmagenic center, and that concept was brought up by a researcher a couple hundred years ago. That yes, something is there. It does affect the environment. Maybe if you stuck some sort of a magnetic field reader into that spot, you would get some sort of reading, maybe. But there's not something there that you can throw a marble at, and the marble's going to bounce back off of it. It's not that degree of physical. So that's a possibility. There's something there that you're perceiving.
Right.
And technically, that's an hallucination. When you're seeing something with the visual processing areas of your brain, or hearing or smelling, but there's nothing physically there that you're seeing with your eyes or hearing with your ears, technically that is an hallucination. And in the parapsychological literature, that's the term that's been used for, again, a couple of hundred years, because it's technically correct. But when we use the term hallucination when talking with somebody, a witness, or somebody who's reported to a case to us, that term is problematic, because when people hear the term hallucination, to most people, they interpret that as meaning, oh, I'm having some sort of mental defect, I'm having some psychological issue, or the guy thinks I'm on drugs and I'm having this type of hallucination. No, that's not what we're talking about. Though in those cases, psychological issues, brain neurology issues, and use of drugs can cause hallucinations. But we're not talking about that in general. We're talking about, hey, something has bypassed the sensory organs of the body, is being processed and perceived directly by the brain. Doesn't mean the person is crazy, doesn't mean the person's on drugs. It means they're perceiving something psychically through ESP.
Gotcha. Randy, we're going to be right back. We have a word from our sponsor, and we're going to have a lot more questions for him tonight. We're back with Randy. Sorry, Randy, I was talking to my bird. I have a question, and I've been fascinated with this. Can the dead communicate with us through dreams? From your experience talking to people.
Well, we're making the assumption here that I think that we're interacting with the dead in the first place. That is one possible explanation for these encounters, but there are always alternative possibilities. So I do not assume as a prima facie thing that when people encounter ghosts or hauntings, that it's a dead person coming back. I'm very open to that possibility, and there are certain cases that might be the simplest and most direct explanation, but there are always other possibilities involving ESP, perception of environmental recordings, picking up, perceiving an apparition of somebody who's not dead. Historically, most apparitions that people have seen have been of living people. The first major investigation done in meta investigation done into people's experiences with hauntings and apparitions, done by the Society of Psychical Research in the 1800s, was called the Apparitions of the Living. And they had a large volume of thousands of cases of reports, and most of them reported seeing people who were alive and known to be alive, just were not there where they were seen. They were out of the country, or out of the state, out of town, but they were seen. But the dynamics were the same. The person would blink or turn around, and the apparition would go away. So even with ghosts, apparitions, not always a dead person. Today, most of the cases that people report are of seeing people that turn out to be dead. When you look into it, and if you can identify that person. The fact is, you and I can be walking down the street past somebody in Times Square. Since ghosts look like living people for the most part, we might be passing ghosts in the street every day and not know it's a ghost if they don't do anything strange or disappear, while we're looking at them. And that could go for apparitions of the living also. If a dead person is being perceived by you or I psychically through ESP, we're seeing that person in front of us with our minds, not with our eyes. And it's the consciousness or some residue of a dead person. The same process might be in effect for a living person. There are cases where people, you mentioned dreams. There are cases where people have been at home at night and they see somebody. Jane just appeared in my kitchen. Jane, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be away at college, or you're supposed to be in Europe. And then Jane disappears, either while you're watching or while you turn your head, and then Jane's no longer there. You talk to Jane on the phone the next day, and Jane says, I was dreaming about you last night, and I dreamed that I came to visit you. And coincidence that Jane was having that dream and you saw Jane appear in your house that night? We don't think it's coincidence. We think there is a process where some psychic projection from Jane is going out into the environment, and we at location B are psychically receiving that imagery and processing it. Or possibly some part of Jane's consciousness actually left her body and came cross country and came to my house. That's one possibility also. And there are some intriguing case studies which seem to be suggestive of that actually something quasi-physical does leave a person's body. There's a whole field of study within parapsychology that addresses that. It's called OBE, out of body experiences. And people say they leave their body. It can be done experimentally. People are trying to do it, or it just happens spontaneously. And the easiest thing to say, people, think they're leaving their body, but they're having a dream, or, they're just, hallucinating, or, they have a very fanciful imagination. But when you look into some of these cases, like when Jane comes across the country to visit me, there may be some quasi-physical component. There are cases, mainly experimental cases, in the 1970s at the American Society for Psychical Research in New York. Alex Tanis, who was a psychic and a parapsychologist, did a series of investigations, and some other folks did also, where they did controlled experiments. Alex would sit in a room in one building, go into a trance state, and intentionally be told, intentionally try to leave his body and go to an address that he was given. Alex, when you do this, go to this address. Alex could do this almost on demand. Go to this address, describe the interior of the apartment, describe documents and papers that were left laying around. But that still could just be psychic. Maybe no part of him is actually physically going to that apartment, but
Mhm.
psychically he's just, using clairvoyance to get that information, to visualize it. What suggests that possibly there may be some physical component of him leaving his body and going to location B. There are cases where they put a strain gauge in the target apartment. Strain gauge is an object that if you touch it or put any pressure on it, it creates a record of that, showing how much pressure was applied, at what time it was applied. Alex would go into he would leave his body, go into the target apartment, see the strain gauge, and push it. And he would, say, okay, at 10:01 p.m., I'm looking at the clock on the wall. It's 10:01 p.m. I am now going to push the strain gauge. When the records are reviewed, something touched the strain gauge at 10:01 p.m. There was another investigator, a psychic who went on to become a parapsychologist named Keith Harari. Keith did similar experiments, either at the ASPR in New York or out of the Psychical Research Foundation in North Carolina. Keith would project his consciousness to his apartment or a target apartment where his cat was being kept. And the cat, when the cat didn't like being away from Keith. So when Keith was in the other lab being tested and the cat was alone, the cat was restless, crying, meowing, running around, going to the door. At the times that Keith said, okay, I'm projecting my consciousness back into my apartment. Oh, I see my cat there. I'm going to pet my cat now and calm my cat down because my cat is very upset. Well, the cat was under video surveillance, camera surveillance.
Mhm.
At the times when Keith said, oh, I'm petting the cat would calm down, lay down, and start purring. At the times when Keith said, okay, I'm leaving the cat now, the cat would again become agitated. This is highly suggestive that there is something at least partially physical that is leaving the body in these cases and is going from point A to point B. That's living people. We're not talking about dead people's ghosts.
Mhm.
Living people can do it. What is a ghost but a person, just dead? If the living person has a consciousness, if that consciousness can be quasi physical, and if it can manipulate the environment, like I said, most ghost cases, things are not moved. Doors are not opened and closed. That's usually poltergeist cases, but there are ghost cases where that does happen. And when you have these experimental cases where people affect a strain gauge or can calm down a cat from a distance, that suggests that there may actually be physical abilities. And if Keith or Alex Tannis, passed away, and Alex Tannis has passed away. If their ghosts were to come back, could Alex's ghost touch something and move it like he moved the strain gauge? Maybe some ghosts of dead people can do that. Others can't. In the very popular movie Ghost with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze, when Patrick Swayze died, he was a ghost, and he learned he couldn't move things. He tried to touch things, and he'd pass right through it. He got frustrated. And another ghost said, hey, you have to practice. You can't do it with your hands because you don't have hands anymore. You have to use your mind, your consciousness, want it to happen, and it takes practice. So in the movie, Patrick kept practicing and practicing, and eventually was able to touch things and move things. That may not be too far away from how this works. And there are certain psychics and mediums who claim to be able to communicate with dead people. And they're told this, that yes, when I first died, I couldn't move anything or touch anybody on their ear to make them feel me, but after, years of trying, now I can go, to visit Randy and tug Randy's ear, and Randy would go, what the hell is that? So maybe that's what's going on. We know that living people apparently can do that experimentally, Alex and Keith and others. So maybe a ghost can do that too.
that was like that was like groundbreaking stuff, but you don't hear a lot about that stuff anymore.
No, you don't.
And that's important. I mean, that's like a huge amount of information that people need to know.
And those experimental cases were done by parapsychological institutions back in the 1970s into the early 80s. That was the heyday of organized institutional and academic parapsychology. There were numerous universities back then with parapsychology labs or parapsychology departments. You had Duke University with the parapsychology lab. You had the American Society for Psychical Research in New York, which is now defunct. The Psychical Research Foundation, which still exists, but it does not exist anywhere near the level it did back in the 60s and 70s into the 80s. Back in the 70s, the Maimonides Medical Center in New York had a parapsychology division. University of Virginia still has a parapsychology division. They've changed the name a couple of times over the years because parapsychology sometimes is not a politically correct name to use in academia because it's a controversial science. So they've sometimes it's known as perception studies or consciousness studies. But University of Virginia still has a lab. They focus mainly on reincarnation case investigations. But you're right. A lot of this organized academic experimental research by parapsychologists was 60s, 70s into the 80s. 80s, 90s into the early to mid 2000s, 2010, 2015. That was really a bad time period for parapsychology. The university labs started shutting down. There's again only a few in the U.S. anymore. There are several in the U.K. and other European countries. Not all of them do actual experimental lab research, though some do. But in the U.S., not that much. You have the University of West Georgia, I believe it's called. They have a parapsychology unit, but they don't do lab work. It's academic, the study of parapsychology as a science subject. But they're not doing experiments like trying to send Alex Tannis to go touch the strain gauge at the apartment. Why is that not being done anymore? Two reasons. One, funding. There's no funding, there's no money in the university system anymore, at least in the U.S. for parapsychology departments. If a school has money, they're going to spend it on their football team, not on a science that a large number of people think is voodoo. They think it's not real. So the labs are always needing money. The other reason, and one of the reasons there's not that much money is because the public interest in parapsychology as a structured academic science, looking into these subjects through the scope of psychology, neurology, medicine, physics. Now there are certain elements of quantum physics that are coming into play and how we think some of these processes may or may not work. What parapsychology is that it is not going into a dark room at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, all right, you ghost, you demon, make my flashlight flick on and off, walking around in the dark, falling downstairs. That's what the general public's pop culture conception of ghost research, paranormal research has become. Why? Because that's how TV reality shows present it. And why do they present it that way? Because it's spooky. It gets people ratings. I've worked numerous cases over the years. I have worked along with parapsychologists. I've worked under the direction of parapsychologists. I have never, and nor have any of my colleagues or anybody I know in the field, ever, run screaming out of a dark basement, dude, run! The demons are after me. It doesn't happen in the real world. Now, yes, there are haunting and apparitional, mainly poltergeist cases, where sometimes the phenomena can take on a spooky approach. Poltergeist cases, people are assaulted, things are smashed. There are cases of people being bit, shoved, scratched. Yeah, that would scare me if it happened to me. But the things you see on these TV shows, where you know, invoking the demonic presence, no, that doesn't happen in the real world. And even the spooky cases, where something is assaultive or hostile, why would we jump to the conclusion, oh, my God, there's a demon waiting in this house for our investigative team to encounter?
Mm-hmm.
Why assume that something preternatural when we know that people are real and there are people who do bad things? There are people who punch, scratch, throw dishes. There are people who kill people. And there are no credible recorded cases that I or my colleagues are aware of where a ghost has killed or people. And by ghost, I am improperly using that as an enveloping term to include poltergeists and hauntings. Paranormal phenomena in general has never killed people. There's one historical case called the Bell Witch case, which was a poltergeist-ish case from Tennessee in the 1800s, where it's alleged that the guy named John Bell was tormented by a poltergeist-type entity. When you actually look into that case in depth and try to pull up the original source documentation for it, the case does not hold up. So I think it's mainly folklore with some real historical elements, but that's not that one case where somebody was allegedly killed by a ghost or a poltergeist. Well, if that's only one case, and that case does not really hold up to scrutiny. But yes, people have been scratched, punched, shoved. Bill Roll, who was the world's most prolific poltergeist investigator until his death in 1982 or 86. No, excuse me, he died in 2002 or 3. But back in the 60s, 70s, and through the 80s, he was the poltergeist guru, parapsychologist, originally from Duke University, then later at West Georgia University. His experiences, he never encountered anything that he thought was evil, demonic. Everything he ever encountered was what he identified as. He identified a focus and identified who he thought was the potential agent. So you have people like that, much more experienced than me. You did not encounter these off the wall demonic, poltergeist cases. But now all of a sudden, since the advent of a couple of TV shows, who will go nameless, who have spawned dozens of copycat TV shows, that's when you can track this demonic shadow entity phenomena to. Again, I'm not going to say it's all made up by these TV shows, but I think it's interesting coincidence that you can time the arrival of the demonic concept in hauntings to the arrival of these TV shows. So take that for what it's worth.
What's the one thing you'd like people to know? If you could tell people just one thing, what would it be?
The phenomena are real. People do have these experiences. You're not crazy. We don't think you're on drugs if you report these experiences. People have reported the exact same experiences and the exact same dynamics going back to the beginning of recorded history. The experiences are real. We do not know for certain what is behind them, what the cause is, and what the mechanisms are. We do have some clues, and we do have some general ideas. That's our concept of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis as a explanation for many poltergeist cases, and I think, and my colleagues do, that most poltergeist cases can be explained by that. It's a subconscious ability of a living person. In some outlier, smaller number of cases of poltergeist activity, it might be the surviving consciousness of a dead person doing the same thing. So you might actually have a ghost in some poltergeist cases, but most we don't have to rely on a dead person. Can't rule it out all the time. We have noticed trends. We've been able to with apparitional cases where people see a ghost. We've been able to determine, based on the dynamics of individual types of cases, that some cases fit into the place memory or residual haunting category. That there's not a surviving consciousness, but somehow past events or emotions are somehow encoded into the environment. And when the right person enters that location, and that person psychically, through ESP, is able to pick up on some of those images, sounds, or even emotions that were recorded by living people, in the past. We don't think there's a surviving intelligence. There's no ghost there. Other cases, though, people will see, apparitions or ghosts, and they're interactive. They seem to try to communicate with you, or they're at least aware of your presence. If you walk up to the lady in white, and the lady in white, seems to react to that and takes 2 steps back from you, well, that's not an environmental recording. There's something there which is aware of your presence, and we've been able to differentiate those 2 types of hauntings. So we do learn more and more. We don't know for certain. We have suggestive evidence. We notice trends, and using the scientific method, we try to falsify those assumptions. So if we think, hey, this might be what's going on, then we try to disprove that. And if it survives that attempt to disprove it, then that may very well mean, hey, we're likely onto something here, until some future observation or discovery throws that out the window. We go, nope, we're wrong. We have to figure this out again. But that is what the scientific method is. It's a constant process of learning, making assumptions based on your observations. Those assumptions either holding up or not holding up, and then you try it again. That's what parapsychology does. We accept that the phenomena are real. Something is going on. And using the sciences, we try to explain what that might be.
I hate to say this, our time is up, but oh my gosh, I could listen to you all night. You're amazing, and thank you for your work. I am just blown away, and I would love to have you back at some point if you would come back. Amazing.
It would be my pleasure, absolutely.
And what's new for you? What's coming up? Where can people see you?
I've been off the physical lecture circuit since COVID started. So all of my lectures and presentations have been on remote and through Zoom. I've been giving presentations to the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena in the UK. They're a break-off group from the Society for Psychical Research in London. That broke off from them to focus more on the field investigation side of things, while a lot of parapsychologists focus more on the lab, academic, in the university basement kind of things. So ASAP, the society that I belong to, as well as the SPR, they actually have an investigative cadre which goes out into the field, and they also do a webinar lecture series, which is excellent. I've played a small part in that over the past couple of years, and I'm giving another presentation in June about a multi-house haunting in New York State. And if anybody is interested in that kind of stuff, you can join this organization for like $5 or $6 a year. So it's not a financial expenditure. So I hope to be getting back on the physical lecture circuit soon. once the schools, universities, and libraries start having lecture series and non-credit courses being open again. Things are starting to slowly but surely get back to normal. Hopefully, keeping my fingers crossed.
Randy, you have a wonderful night. And gosh, like I said, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Have a good night.
You too.
The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.